722 local. Taiwan Strait, 44 nautical miles south-southwest of the Penghu Islands, 31 nautical miles from the Chinese coast near Quanzhou. International waters. Sea state, light. Swells at 0.9 meters. Wind at 8 knots. Visibility 11 nautical miles under a clear morning sky. A calm, straight morning. USS Mustin, DDG-89, Arleigh Burke class. Flight 2A destroyer was conducting the 47th Taiwan Strait transit in the preceding 14 months. A routine northbound passage through international waters. 17 knots, running lights on, AIS transmitting. The ship had been in the strait for 6 hours, entering at the southern end at 1:18 local. Standard transit. The contact picture at 722 was what 14 months of straight transits had established as baseline. Planned surface combatants holding at distance. Planned Coast Guard vessels on observation tracks. Commercial traffic in the shipping lanes. The northbound lane had 3 commercial vessels ahead of Mustin. A tanker at 14 nautical miles. A container ship at 22 nautical miles. And a larger contact at 31 nautical miles. That the SPS-73 surface search radar had classified as a passenger ferry. AIS confirmed. Taiwan New Star Ferry Company, the MV Formosa Sunrise, 312 meters, 68,000 tons, on its regular Kaohsiung to Taichung coastal route, carrying 847 passengers and 94 crew according to its manifest. The ferry transited this corridor 3 times per week. It was as routine a contact as the strait produced. USS Mustin had been tracking a planned Type 055 cruiser, hull designation identified as the Dalian, since 0344, when it had appeared on the northern SPY-1D picture bearing 012, range 68 nautical miles. The Type 055 had been closing at 14 knots on a southbound heading since first contact, consistent with the standard plan shadowing behavior that had characterized every one of Mustin's 47 transits. Close enough to be present, far enough to be within law. At 722, the Dalian was at 38 nautical miles, bearing 014. Still to the north, still closing at 14 knots. Closing range at approximately 31 nautical miles per hour. At 722.44, the Dalian altered course. Not the standard 2 to 4 degree course adjustments that maintained a parallel shadowing track. A 14-degree course change, turning from 190 to 204 degrees, no longer a parallel track, but a converging one. The Type 055 was now heading to cross ahead of Mustin's northbound path at a point the SPY-1D computed as approximately 18 nautical miles north of Mustin's current position. The TAO noted the course change at 0722.51 and logged it. Unusual. Not threshold. At 7:28:19, the MV Formosa Sunrise, the passenger ferry at 31 nautical miles bearing 012, altered course. 4 degrees to port, from 003 to 359, a slight westward shift. Consistent with normal navigational variation for a ferry maintaining its coastal route in light traffic. Logged as routine. At 7:31:08, the Dalian was at 22 nautical miles bearing 013. The ferry was at 24 nautical miles bearing 012. The 2 contacts, the planned Type 055 and the civilian ferry, were now 2 nautical miles apart, with the ferry slightly closer to Mustin and slightly more to the south. The ferry was between Mustin and the Dalian. The SPY-1D contact geometry at 7:31:08. Mustin, bearing reference. MV Formosa Sunrise, 24 nautical miles bearing 012. Planned Dalian, 22 nautical miles bearing 013. The Dalian was 2 nautical miles north-northeast of the ferry, and 2 nautical miles further from Mustin. At 7:33:14, the Dalian's Type 346 BAESA fire control radar activated. The SLQ-32 registered it at 7:33:14. A sustained active lock, not a brief illumination. The emission was tracking Mustin. At 22 nautical miles, the Dalian's fire control solution for a YJ-18 engagement was computable. The geometry placed the ferry between the Dalian's fire control solution axis and Mustin. Any YJ-18 fired from the Dalian toward Mustin would pass through the airspace above and around the ferry in its initial flight phase. The TAO upgraded the contact to Priority 1 at 7:33:17 and called the captain. At 7:33:44, the SPY-1D acquired 2 launches from the Dalian's position. 2 tracks, both bearing 192 from the Dalian, bearing directly toward Mustin. Classification took 1.8 seconds. YJ-18 anti-ship cruise missile, both in rocket-boosted launch phase. Speed increasing through Mach 1.5. Time of flight at cruise speed to Mustin, 4 minutes, 31 seconds. General quarters at 07:33:46. 2 seconds from classification. The tactical picture was the most operationally complex USS Mustin had encountered in 47 transits. 2 YJ-18 anti-ship missiles in flight from a Plan Type 055 cruiser, 22 nautical miles north. Between that cruiser and Mustin, MV Formosa Sunrise, 847 passengers, 94 crew, 312 meters of civilian vessel at 24 nautical miles bearing 012, 2 nautical miles south of the Dalian, which placed it approximately 2 nautical miles along the YJ-18's initial flight path. The SM-6's engagement geometry against the 2 YJ-18s was constrained by one specific physical fact. The missile's initial flight path from the Dalian toward Mustin passed through the airspace approximately 400 meters north of the MV Formosa Sunrise's course track, not over the ferry, not directly through the ferry's position, but within the SM-6's kill radius. The blast fragmentation zone of the SM-6's warhead was assessed as lethally effective within approximately 300 meters of detonation. A detonation 400 meters from a 312-meter civilian ship with 941 persons aboard was not an acceptable engagement solution. The loft phase intercept corridor for both YJ-18S, the high-altitude engagement window where the SM-6 could achieve the cleanest intercept geometry, passed directly above the ferry's track at altitudes between 8,000 and 12,000 meters. At those altitudes, the SM-6's detonation against a YJ-18 produced a debris field that at standard atmospheric density would disperse widely before reaching surface level. The loft phase detonation debris was not the concern. The concern was the close-range geometry at low altitude. The SM-6 engaging a sea-skimming YJ-18 at 2 to 4 nautical miles in close proximity to a civilian vessel. The engagement calculation was not whether the SM-6 could intercept the YJ-18S. It could. It was where the intercept needed to occur to avoid placing a civilian vessel with 941 persons in the blast radius of either the SM-6 detonation or the YJ-18 warhead if the intercept was imperfect. The answer was engage early, high, and far. SM-6 rounds 1 and 2 away at 07:33:58, 12 seconds from launch detection. Both rounds designated against track alpha at a computed early intercept point at 19 nautical miles range, loft phase. The intercept geometry placed the detonation at approximately 9,000 meters altitude, well above the ferry's physical location and at a lateral distance of 3.1 nautical miles from the ferry's track. SM-6 rounds 3 and 4 away at 07:34:03 against track Bravo, same intercept geometry. 4 SM-6 rounds in 5 seconds. Both YJ-18S engaged in loft phase, both intercepts computed for 9,000 meter altitude and 3.1 nautical miles from the civilian vessel. The MV Formosa Sunrise was transmitting on channel 16 at 07:34:02, reporting a radar anomaly on its bridge. when the SM-6 launches from Mustin became visible to the ferry's lookouts as two streaks of exhaust climbing steeply to the north. SM-6 Round 1 reached track Alpha at 7:35:44 at 18 nautical miles range, 8,800 meters altitude. Seeker acquired the YJ-18 and guided to detonation. Track Alpha, neutralized at 7:35:47. Debris field at 8,800 meters altitude, dispersing laterally. No debris within 2,100 meters of the ferry's position at surface level. SM-6 Round 3 reached track Bravo at 7:35:52 at 17 nautical miles, 9,100 meters. Track Bravo, neutralized. Debris field at altitude. No surface level debris near the ferry. Rounds 2 and 4 self-destructed at 7:36:04. 2 YJ-18 anti-ship cruise missiles. 2 SM-6 intercepts. Both detonations at altitude, 3.1 nautical miles lateral separation from the civilian ferry. 0 fragments reached the ferry's surface level position. USS Mustin was undamaged. The MV Formosa Sunrise was undamaged. 941 civilian passengers and crew were unaffected. The Dalian was at 22 nautical miles, bearing 013. It had not maneuvered after the YJ-18 launch. At 7:36:11, the TAO reported to the captain. Both tracks neutralized. No damage to Mustin, no debris detected at ferry position. Dalian at 22 nautical miles. The captain had been in CIC from 7:33:17. The engagement had been won. The strategic question it produced was the more difficult problem. The plan had positioned the MV Formosa Sunrise between its fire control solution and USS Mustin. Whether the ferry's course change at 7:28:19 had been coordinated with the Dalian's positioning. Whether the 4-degree port turn had been a planned coordinated maneuver designed to place the civilian vessel on the engagement axis. Or whether it had been a genuine navigational variation that the Dalian had exploited opportunistically was a question the surveillance record did not answer definitively. The ferry's AIS data was consistent with normal navigation. The ferry's communication logs showed no contact with planned maritime authorities in the preceding 40 minutes. The evidence was ambiguous. The outcome was not. The Dalian had fired 2 YJ-18 anti-ship missiles through the airspace proximate to a civilian ferry with 941 persons aboard. Whether that had been deliberate shielding doctrine or tactical opportunism, the physical fact was documented. USS Mustin's captain reported to 7th Fleet at 7:37:22. The report was comprehensive and specific. 2 YJ-18 launches from planned Dalian at 22 nautical miles. Both neutralized by SM-6 at altitude to maintain civilian vessel separation. No damage to Mustin. No debris at ferry position. The Dalian had fired through an engagement geometry that placed the MV Formosa Sunrise, a civilian passenger vessel with 941 persons, between its launch platform and the target. The SM-6 engagement had been specifically planned to intercept at altitude to avoid proximity detonation near the civilian vessel. The engagement geometry had been deliberate on the plan's part, whether by design or exploitation. 7th Fleet transmitted the report to Indopacom at 7:37:41. The Dalian's AIS track, the ferry's AIS track, the Dalian's fire control radar emission log from the SLQ-32, and the SPY-1D engagement record were transmitted simultaneously. The question of authorization, and its scope, was now the most operationally sensitive decision in the engagement record. The authorization came at 7:44:08, 6 minutes and 46 seconds after the captain's report. The authorization was specific in 2 ways that no previous engagement in this record had required. First, it authorized the engagement of the planned Dalian as a hostile combatant that had conducted a lethal weapons employment against a U.S. warship in the Taiwan Strait. Second, it specified that the engagement geometry must ensure no debris, no proximity detonation, and no kinetic effect within 4 nautical miles of the MV Formosa Sunrise. The same constraint that had governed the SM-6 engagement governed the response. Target package. Site Alpha. Plan Dalian, Type 055 cruiser, currently at 24 nautical miles bearing 013, maneuvering north at 18 knots following the YJ-18 launch. A surface ship engagement by SM-6 at this range was geometrically clean. The Dalian had opened distance from the ferry's position to 4.3 nautical miles north-northeast by 074408, placing it outside the engagement proximity constraint. Site Bravo. Plan Eastern Theater Command Naval Operations Center at Zhoushan, assessed as the authorization authority for the Dalian's engagement. Fixed installation. Site Charlie. The Plan Missile. Storage and replenishment facility at Ningbo Naval Base, assessed as the source of the YJ-18 load carried by the Dalian. Fixed installation. 4 SM-6 surface engagement rounds from Mustin's VLS at 744.19 against the Dalian at 26 nautical miles. The ferry's position at 744.19, 16 nautical miles south of the Dalian, 4.1 nautical miles south of the SM-6's computed intercept corridor. Outside the blast radius constraint, SM-6 rounds 1 through 4 in surface engagement mode, impacts on the Dalian's hull amidships and aft weapon section at 0745.44 through 0745.49. The Type 055 sustained severe structural damage to its amidship section. Its propulsion was assessed as degraded. The ship slowed from 18 knots to approximately 3 knots within 90 seconds of impact. The Dalian was not assessed as in danger of structural loss. It was listing 6 degrees to port and under limited power, but afloat. Running cost. 4 SM, 6 anti-ship mode at $2.3 million each, $9.2 million. The ship that had fired 2 YJ-18 missiles at USS Mustin through the airspace proximate to a civilian ferry with 941 persons aboard was non-operational at 7:46:00, 12 minutes and 14 seconds after it had fired. USS Laboon, DDG-58, was 88 nautical miles north. Tomahawk authorization received at 7:44:20 simultaneously. Carrier Strike Group USS Ronald Reagan, CVN-76, was 310 nautical miles east. Air wing authorization at 7:44:30. T+0. 2 YJ-18S launched 7:33. T+2 minutes. Both intercepted at altitude. 7:35. T+10 minutes. Authorization 7:44. T+11 minutes. SM-6 engagement of Dalian 7:44. T+13 minutes. Tomahawks away from Laboon 7:46. T+19 minutes. F/A-18 wheels up from Reagan 7:52. T+51 minutes. First Tomahawk impacts Site Bravo 8:24. Tomahawks 1 through 6 from Laboon. Site Bravo. Zhoushan Naval Operations Center. 6 rounds. Running cost, $11.2 million plus SM-6 for the Dalian, $20.4 million total. Tomahawks 7 through 10. Site Charlie, Ningbo Missile Facility. 4 rounds. Running cost, $27.9 million. At 8:24, 51 minutes after the YJ-18 launches, the first Tomahawk reached Site Bravo at Zhoushan. Operations building confirmed impacted. Communications center confirmed. Radar integration facility confirmed. Site Bravo assessed as inoperable at 08:25:31. 08:29. Site Charlie, Ningbo. 3 of 4 rounds confirmed on target. Missile storage and handling structures severely damaged. 4th round impacted the facility's access road rather than the designated secondary storage building due to a GPS update anomaly in terminal phase. Secondary building survived. First fog element. F/A 18 formations from Reagan reached weapons release range at 0852 targets, supporting planned radar and communications infrastructure in the East China Sea that had provided the Dalian with Mustin's position data for the engagement, and the Dalian's home pier infrastructure at Zhoushan. 8 JASSM-ER against 3 installations. 6 of 8 confirmed on target. Both East China Sea radar installations confirmed neutralized. Zhoushan pier infrastructure confirmed impacted. 1 JASSM-ER failed guidance in terminal phase, impacted open water. 1 JASSM-ER impacted an adjacent warehouse structure rather than the designated pier crane facility. Second fog element. At 0931, all aircraft recovered to Reagan. The MV Formosa Sunrise had continued its transit throughout the engagement. At 9 o'clock, the ferry was 41 nautical miles north of its 722 position on its regular route to Taichung. Its 941 passengers and 94 crew were unaffected by the engagement that had occurred in the airspace above and around their route. The accounting. Plan investment. 2 YJ-18 missiles at $3 million each. $6 million. Dalian operational deployment, $4 million. Coordination costs, $500,000. Total, $10.5 million. Damage achieved, 0. Both YJ-18S intercepted at altitude. No contact with Mustin. No debris at the ferry's position. No civilian vessel affected. U.S. response cost, 8 SM-6 rounds total, $18.4 million. 10 Tomahawks, $18.7 million. 8 J, ASSM-ER, $11.2 million. FA-18 sorties, $7.2 million. Total, $55.5 million. Adversary assets affected. Dalian severely damaged, non-operational, listing. Assessed as requiring 18 to 24 months of shipyard repair. Site Bravo Zhoushan Operations Center confirmed inoperable. Site Charlie Ningbo Missile Facility severely damaged, 1 structure survived. Supporting radar and communications infrastructure eliminated. The plan's engagement geometry, whether deliberate or opportunistic, had required the U.S. Navy to solve a tactical problem it had not previously encountered in the Taiwan Strait. Engaging a threat in close proximity to a civilian vessel with hundreds of occupants. The solution? Loft phase intercept at altitude with computed lateral separation from the civilian vessel. Worked because the SM-6's engagement envelope at 19 nautical miles range permitted a high altitude intercept. At shorter range, the same geometry might not have been available. The operational precedent established by this engagement. The plan has employed, or opportunistically exploited, a civilian vessel's proximity as a geometric factor in a weapons employment against a U.S. warship. That precedent is now in the engagement record. The SM-6's ability to engage at altitude, to choose where the intercept occurs, is now a documented tactical response to that precedent. The engagement record goes to every ship in the fleet. The strategic dimension of the engagement required its own accounting, separate from the tactical outcome. What the plan had demonstrated, whether by deliberate doctrine or opportunistic exploitation, was that a Type 055 cruiser, maneuvering to place a civilian vessel on its engagement axis with a U.S. warship, created a tactical constraint on the SM-6's engagement geometry. Not an insurmountable constraint. The SM-6 had solved it. But the existence of the constraint was itself strategically significant. Any U.S. engagement system operator facing this geometry had to solve a harder problem than a standard YJ-18 intercept. They had to solve it faster, with specific altitude and lateral separation parameters, under the pressure of an active missile threat with seconds to impact. The plan had found the hardest version of the engagement problem the U.S. Navy had encountered in the Strait. The SM-6's loft phase intercept capability at 19 nautical miles and 9,000 meters altitude had solved it. If the engagement range had been shorter, if the YJ-18S had been launched at 10 nautical miles rather than 22. The altitude-intercept window would have compressed dramatically, reducing the available engagement geometry and potentially bringing the close-in CIWS engagement into play at ranges where the civilian vessel separation could not be guaranteed. The Dalian's 22 nautical mile launch range had, inadvertently, given the SM-6 the room it needed to solve the problem cleanly. A closer launch would have required a different and more difficult engagement solution. This was not a miscalculation the plan had made. It was a constraint the plan had operated within. A constraint imposed by the engagement geometry that the civilian ferry's position had created. The Dalian could not fire at 10 nautical miles through the ferry's position without accepting that the ferry's position would also complicate the engagement geometry for any SM-6 intercept. From 22 nautical miles, the ferry was far enough from the launch point that the YJ-18's initial flight phase cleared the civilian vessel's airspace. From 10 nautical miles, the geometry would have been different. USS Mustin's engagement log, transmitted in full to Indopacom, went immediately into the defensive planning database for every ship scheduled for Taiwan Strait transits. The altitude-intercept constraint, the requirement to engage at altitude when a civilian vessel is within a specified proximity of the threat track, became a standing rule of engagement consideration within 12 hours of the engagement's completion. The ferry arrived in Taichung at 14:22, local, on schedule. Its passengers unaware that two YJ-18 anti-ship cruise missiles had been neutralized 3.1 nautical miles from their vessel's track at an altitude of 9,000 meters during the morning transit. The ticket price for that morning's ferry crossing had not included this. The engagement that protected them produced no sound they could hear from the deck. USS Mustin, DDG-89. 0 damage. All systems nominal throughout. SM-6 inventory. 12 of 24 remaining after both engagements. SPY-1D, all 4 arrays nominal. Personnel. Unaffected. Transit completed. Ship exited Strait northern end at 10:44. MV Formosa Sunrise, 0 damage. Transit completed. Arrived Taichung 14:22 local, on schedule. 847 passengers and 94 crew unaffected. Planned Dalian, type 055. Severely damaged, listing 6 degrees port. Propulsion assessed at reduced capacity. A midship section structurally compromised. Assessed as requiring 18 to 24 months shipyard repair. USS Laboon, DDG-58. No damage. 10 Tomahawks expended. USS Ronald Reagan, CVN-76. 8 JASSM-ER expended. 8 F/A, 18 E/F sorties. All aircraft recovered. Total U.S. response cost, $55.5 million. Adversary, Dalian, non-operational. Listing, assessed 18 to 24 months repair. Site Bravo Zhoushan, confirmed inoperable. Site Charlie Ningbo, severely damaged, 1 secondary structure survived. East China Sea radar and communications, both confirmed neutralized. Zhoushan Pier, confirmed impacted. U.S. execution. Gaps. Site Charlie secondary building survived Tomahawk GPS anomaly. 1 JASSM-ER, failed terminal guidance. Open water impact. 1 JASSM-ER impacted adjacent structure rather than designated pier facility. Plan engagement geometry. Deliberate shielding doctrine versus opportunistic exploitation. Not conclusively determined from available evidence. 12 minutes and 14 seconds. The interval between the Dalian's YJ-18 launch and the SM-6 surface engagement that rendered it non-operational. 2 YJ-18 missiles in the air, a civilian vessel with 941 persons between the threat and the target. An engagement geometry that required altitude intercepts at 9,000 meters to maintain civilian separation. and a weapon system that had the kinematic range to solve all of it inside the 4-minute and 31-second window the YJ-18S provided. The Dalian was at 22 nautical miles when it fired. The SM-6 intercepted both missiles at altitude and struck the Dalian in surface mode, all within 12 minutes. The ferry arrived in Taichung on schedule. The 48th transit is scheduled. The strait is open.